The cold October wind bit through Maria's thin coat as she stood outside Peterson's bakery. Her 3-month-old baby boy slept fitfully in her arms, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days. She had been standing there for almost an hour, watching people come and go, buying fresh bread and warm pastries. The smell made her stomach twist with hunger. It had been 2 days since she last ate a proper meal. 2 long, awful days of drinking water to fill the empty space in her belly and trying to make her breast milk last for little Tommy. She pressed her face against the baby's soft hair and tried not to cry. Crying wouldn't help anyone right now. The town of Pine Ridge had always been small, but lately it felt like it was getting smaller every day. People were leaving for the bigger cities, looking for work that just wasn't there anymore. The year 1932 had been cruel to everyone, but especially to young mothers like Maria, who found themselves alone with no money and nowhere to turn. Her husband David had left 3 weeks ago. Just packed his things one morning and walked out without a word. She found his wedding ring on the kitchen table next to a pile of unpaid bills and an eviction notice. The landlord wanted his money by the end of the week, and Maria had exactly 12 cents to her name. At first, she thought David would come back. Maybe he just needed some time to think, to figure things out. But as the days passed and her situation got worse, she realized he wasn't coming home. She was on her own with a baby who needed food, diapers, and a warm place to sleep. The neighbors had been kind at first. Mrs. Collins from next door brought over some leftover soup. The family across the street gave her some old baby clothes. Their son had outgrown, but everyone was struggling. Everyone had their own problems, their own mouths to feed. The charity could only stretch so far. Yesterday, Tommy's formula ran out. Maria had tried everything she could think of. She sold her wedding dress to the pawn shop for $3. She traded her mother's pearl necklace for a week's worth of milk. She even asked the church for help, but they were already helping so many families that their resources were stretched thin. Now she stood outside the bakery, watching Mrs. Peterson through the window. The older woman had been glancing her way for the past hour, probably wondering why this young mother was just standing there in the cold. Maria knew Mrs. Peterson was a good woman. She had always been kind to the young families in town, sometimes giving away day-old bread to children who looked hungry. But what Maria was about to ask wasn't about day-old bread. It was something much bigger, much more desperate. Something that would change her life forever. She had heard the talk around town. Mrs. Peterson and her husband had been married for 15 years, but they never had children. Maria had seen the way Mrs. Peterson's eyes lit up whenever she saw babies at the church social events. The way she would offer to hold them, to rock them when they cried. There was a longing there that everyone in town could see. Maria looked down at Tommy. He was such a good baby, hardly ever cried unless he was hungry or needed changing. He had bright blue eyes and the tiniest fingers she had ever seen. When he smiled, which wasn't often these days, it was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. He deserved so much better than this. Better than a mother who couldn't even feed him properly. The wind picked up again, and Tommy stirred in his sleep. Maria pulled the blanket tighter around him and made her decision. She couldn't stand out here forever. She couldn't keep pretending that somehow, magically, things would get better. She had to do something, even if that something broke her heart into 1,000 pieces. She pushed open the bakery door, and the little bell above it chimed softly. The warmth hit her face immediately, along with the incredible smell of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls. Her mouth watered, and her stomach made an embarrassing growling sound. Mrs. Peterson looked up from behind the counter, where she was arranging some cookies in the display case. She was a plump woman in her 40s with kind eyes and flour always dusting her apron. When she saw Maria, her expression immediately became concerned. "Oh, my dear, you look frozen solid. Come in, come in. How's that little one doing?" Maria stepped further into the shop, her legs shaking slightly. She wasn't sure if it was from the cold or from nerves about what she was about to do. He's doing okay, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you for asking. But that wasn't really true. And they both knew it. Tommy was losing weight. His cheeks weren't as round as they had been a month ago. He slept more than he should, probably because his little body was trying to conserve energy. Maria was failing as a mother, and everyone in town could see it. Mrs. Peterson came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. I was just thinking about you yesterday. How are you managing? Is there anything I can do to help? This was it. This was the moment Maria had been building up to for the past hour. She took a deep breath and tried to steady her voice. Actually, Mrs. Peterson, there is something, but it's not what you might expect. The older woman waited patiently, her kind eyes focused on Maria's face. She had probably helped dozens of young mothers over the years, given away countless loaves of bread to families who couldn't afford them. But what Maria was about to ask would be different from anything Mrs. Peterson had ever been asked before. Maria shifted Tommy to one arm and reached into her coat pocket with her free hand. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, the eviction notice that had been haunting her dreams for weeks. I have to be out of my place by Friday. I don't have anywhere to go, and I don't have any money for food or formula. Mrs. Peterson nodded sympathetically. Oh, honey, that's terrible. But surely there's something we can work out. Maybe the church can help, or... No, Maria interrupted softly. The church is already helping the Johnson family and the Millers. There just isn't enough help to go around. She paused, gathering her courage for what came next. Mrs. Peterson, I know you and your husband have always wanted children. The change in Mrs. Peterson's expression was immediate. Her eyes widened slightly and her hands clasped together in front of her chest. She seemed to understand where this conversation was heading before Maria even said the words. I can't take care of him, Maria whispered, her voice breaking. I can't feed him properly. I can't keep him warm. I can't give him the life he deserves. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. But you could. You and Mr. Peterson could give him everything I can't. The bakery fell completely silent except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of bread baking in the ovens. Mrs. Peterson stood frozen, staring at the baby in Maria's arms. Tommy chose that moment to wake up, blinking, his bright blue eyes and making a soft cooing sound. Maria, Mrs. Peterson whispered, are you asking what I think you're asking? Mrs. Peterson's hands trembled as she stared at little Tommy in Maria's arms. The question hung in the air between them like a thick fog. Maria could see the shock in the older woman's eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like pain, mixed with longing. Yes, Maria whispered, her voice barely audible above the humming of the bakery ovens. I'm asking if you and your husband would take him, raise him as your own. The words felt like broken glass coming out of her throat. I know how much you've always wanted a baby. Mrs. Peterson took a step back, her hand flying to her chest. Oh, my dear Lord, she breathed. Maria, you can't be serious. This is your child, your flesh and blood? But Maria pressed on, the words tumbling out faster now, as if speaking them quickly would make the pain less sharp. Look at him, Mrs. Peterson. Really look at him, he's getting thinner every day. I can't produce enough milk anymore because I'm not eating enough. Yesterday he cried for 3 hours straight, and I had nothing to give him. Tommy stirred in her arms, making soft baby sounds. His tiny fist escaped from the blanket and waved in the air. Mrs. Peterson's eyes followed the movement, and Maria could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. You have this beautiful bakery, Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. With desperation, you and Mr. Peterson have steady income. You could give him warm clothes, a proper crib, all the food he needs. He could grow up healthy and strong and happy. Mrs. Peterson shook her head slowly, backing toward the counter. But Maria, he's your baby. You carried him for 9 months. You gave birth to him. How could you possibly... Because I love him, Maria interrupted, tears streaming down her face now. I love him so much that I'm willing to give him up so he can have a real life. Not this half-life where he's always hungry and cold and scared, the older woman's eyes filled with tears too. She had indeed dreamed of having a child for 15 long years. Every month that passed without getting pregnant had been like a small death. She and her husband Henry had talked about adoption, but there were so many requirements, so much paperwork, and they were getting older every year. What about you? Mrs. Peterson asked softly. What would happen to you? Maria had thought about this part too during the long sleepless nights when Tommy cried from hunger. I'd leave Pine Ridge, go to the city, maybe Chicago or Detroit, find work in a factory or as a maid. Start over somewhere nobody knows my story. You'd never see him again? The question hit Maria like a physical blow. She looked down at Tommy's perfect little face, memorizing every detail. His button nose, his soft cheeks, the way his eyelashes curved. It would be better that way. For him, I mean. He shouldn't have to grow up knowing his real mother was so useless she couldn't even keep him fed. Mrs. Peterson moved closer again, her baker's instincts taking over. She had fed hungry people for 20 years, and she could see the desperation written in every line of Maria's thin face. When did you last eat, dear? Day before yesterday. Had some crackers Mrs. Collins brought over, and before that? Maria had to think. The days were all blurring together lately. Maybe 3 days? I found some old apples behind the grocery store that weren't too bruised. Mrs. Peterson made a soft sound of distress. Oh, honey, no wonder you can't produce milk. You're starving. Yourself. She hurried behind the counter and started pulling items from the shelves. Fresh bread, still warm from the oven. A jar of preserves, some cheese wrapped in brown paper. Here, take these, please. But Maria shook her head, even as her stomach growled loudly at the sight of food. I can't pay for any of that. I'm not asking you to pay. I'm giving it to you. No, Maria said firmly. I can't keep taking charity. That's why I'm here, don't you see? I can't live like this anymore, always depending on other people's kindness. Always being the poor girl everyone feels sorry for. She adjusted Tommy in her arms. But if you and Mr. Peterson took him, it wouldn't be charity. It would be giving him to people who really want him. Mrs. Peterson set the food on the counter but didn't put it away. She studied Maria's face carefully, looking for any sign that this was just desperation talking, that the young woman might change her mind. But all she saw was a mother's love expressed in the most heartbreaking way possible. Have you thought about what this would mean? Mrs. Peterson asked gently. Really thought about it? Once you sign papers, once you walk away, there's no going back. He would be our son, legally and in every other way, Maria nodded. I've thought about nothing else for days. I've imagined him taking his first steps in your house, learning to talk, calling you Mama, going to school with nice clothes and a full lunchbox. Her voice broke. I've imagined him being happy. The bell above the door chimed, and both women looked up to see old Mr. Henderson shuffle in. He tipped his hat to them and headed toward the bread display, but Mrs. Peterson quickly intercepted him. Mr. Henderson, I'm sorry, but we're closed for a few minutes. Family emergency? Could you come back in about an hour? The old man nodded understandingly and left without complaint. Mrs. Peterson locked the door behind him and flipped the sign to closed. She didn't want anyone interrupting this conversation. Maria, she said, turning back to face the young mother, this isn't a decision that should be made in desperation. What if I helped you get back on your feet instead? What if Henry and I lent you money for rent, helped you find work? But Maria was already shaking her head. And then what? I'd owe you money I could never pay back. I'd still be the charity case, just with a different arrangement. And Tommy would still be living with a mother who can barely take care of herself. Mrs. Peterson walked over to the front window and stared out at the gray October day. Pine Ridge looked especially bleak today, with most of the leaves fallen and winter coming fast. She thought about her husband Henry, how his face lit up whenever they passed children playing in the street, how he always saved the broken cookies for the neighborhood kids, claiming they were too ugly to sell but perfect for small hands. I need to talk to Henry, she said finally. This isn't a decision I can make alone. Maria felt a strange mix of relief and terror. Part of her had hoped Mrs. Peterson would say no immediately, would refuse even to consider such a thing. That would have made the decision for her, but this meant it might actually happen. How long do you need? Maria asked. Give me until tomorrow morning. Can you do that? Can you wait one more day? Maria looked down at Tommy, who was starting to fuss a little. She could tell he was getting hungry again, and she had nothing to give him. "Tomorrow morning," she agreed. "But Mrs. Peterson, if you and your husband decide, yes, I want to leave town that same day, I don't want to drag this out and make it harder for everyone," Mrs. Peterson nodded, understanding. "And if we say no?" Maria hadn't let herself think about that possibility. "Then I'll figure something else out. I have to." The two women stood in silence for a moment, both of them looking at the baby who had no idea his entire future was being decided above his head. Tommy yawned and settled back into sleep, completely trusting in the arms that held him. "Take the food," Mrs. Peterson said suddenly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, take the food today, please." This time Maria didn't argue. Maria had spent a sleepless night in her cold apartment, holding Tommy close and trying not to think about what tomorrow might bring. She had eaten the bread and cheese Mrs. Peterson gave her, and for the first time in days she felt strong enough to produce milk for her baby. But even that small relief felt bittersweet, knowing it might be one of the last times she would feed him herself. Now she stood outside the bakery again, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone on Main Street could hear it. The morning sun was trying to break through the gray clouds, but the October air still bit at her cheeks. Tommy was wrapped in his warmest blanket, the one her mother had knitted before she passed away last spring. Through the bakery window, she could see Mrs. Peterson moving around inside, preparing for the day. The older woman looked tired, like she hadn't slept much either. Maria took a deep breath and pushed open the door, making the little bell announce her arrival. "Maria," Mrs. Peterson said softly, looking up from the cash register she was filling with coins. "Right on time. Did you and your husband talk?" Mrs. Peterson nodded slowly. "We talked until almost 3 in the morning." She paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "Henry cried, you know. A grown man of 45 years old, sitting at our kitchen table and crying like a baby." Maria's heart sank. That didn't sound like good news. "He said no, didn't he?" "Oh, no, dear. He cried because he was happy. He's wanted a child for so long that when I told him about your offer, he couldn't believe it was real." Mrs. Peterson's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We stayed up making plans, converting the spare room into a nursery, talking about what we'd name him, imagining teaching him to help in the bakery when he got older." Relief and heartbreak crashed over Maria at the same time. This was what she wanted, what was best for Tommy. So why did it feel like someone was tearing her heart out of her chest? "So you'll take him?" Mrs. Peterson walked around the counter and reached out to touch Tommy's cheek gently. "We will love him like he was born to us. I promise you that he'll never want for anything." Maria was about to respond when the bakery door suddenly burst open with such force that the bell nearly jumped off its hook. Both women spun around to see a tall man in work clothes stumbling through the entrance, shaking rain from his coat and stamping mud off his boots. "Sorry about that," the man said, pushing the door closed against the wind that had picked up outside. "Didn't realize it was gonna slam like that." Maria recognized him immediately. Robert Wheeler, one of the lumberjacks who worked at the mill outside town. She had seen him around Pine Ridge for years, though they had never really talked. He was a big man, probably in his 30s, with calloused hands and the kind of broad shoulders that came from years of hard physical work. "Morning, Mrs. Peterson," Robert said, nodding politely to the older woman. "Just need my usual loaf of bread if you have one ready." But Mrs. Peterson seemed flustered by the interruption. She glanced nervously between Robert and Maria, clearly uncomfortable about having this private conversation witnessed by someone else. "Of course, Robert. Just give me a moment." Robert noticed the tension in the room immediately. He had worked dangerous jobs his whole life, and staying alive meant being aware of your surroundings. He could see that the young woman holding the baby had been crying, and Mrs. Peterson looked like she was about to cry too. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, his voice gentle despite his imposing size. Maria started to say everything was fine, but Mrs. Peterson spoke first. "Actually, Robert, maybe you could help us with something. You know most everyone in town, don't you?" Robert nodded. Slowly, still not sure what he was walking into. Been here about 10 years now? Why? Mrs. Peterson looked at Maria, silently asking permission. When the young woman nodded, Mrs. Peterson explained the situation. This is Maria. Her husband left her a few weeks ago, and she's having trouble making ends meet. She was just asking if Henry and I might be able to help with the baby. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't exactly a lie either. Robert studied Maria's face, taking in the dark circles under her eyes, the way her clothes hung loose on her thin frame. He had seen that look before during the worst of the economic troubles. Desperation had a particular appearance that was hard to miss. What kind of help? He asked. Maria found her voice. I can't take care of him properly. I thought maybe the Petersons could give him a better life than I can. Robert's expression darkened. You're talking about giving up your baby? I'm talking about doing what's best for him, Maria said, lifting her chin defiantly. She was tired of being judged, tired of people acting like she hadn't thought this through. I can't feed him. I can't keep him warm. I'm being evicted on Friday. What kind of life is that for a baby? Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying Tommy's face. There was something about the baby that seemed familiar, though he couldn't place it. The shape of his eyes, maybe, or the way his tiny mouth curved. What did you say your last name was? I didn't, Maria replied, but it's Patterson, Maria Patterson. And your husband? Maria's face tightened with anger and hurt. David Mitchell. Though I guess that doesn't matter much since he ran off and left us. Robert went very still. The color drained from his face, and he took a step closer to Maria and the baby. Did you say David Mitchell? Yes. Do you know him? Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he was staring intently at Tommy, his eyes growing wider by the second. How old is the baby? 3 months, Maria answered, confused by the strange questions. Why? And David? What did he look like? Maria was getting annoyed now. I don't see how that's any of your business. He was tall, brown hair, green eyes. Had a scar on his chin from when he fell off a horse as a kid. Why are you asking me all this? Robert's hands were shaking now. He reached out toward the baby, then pulled his hand back. Mrs. Peterson, could I hold him for a minute? Both women stared at him in surprise. Robert, Mrs. Peterson said carefully, this is a very difficult situation. I don't think ... Please, Robert said, and there was something desperate in his voice now. I need to see him up close. I think I might know who he is. Maria clutched Tommy tighter. What do you mean, you know who he is? He's my son. Yes, Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I think he might be my nephew. The bakery fell completely silent except for the sound of rain starting to patter against the windows. Mrs. Peterson sank onto the stool behind the counter, her mouth hanging open. Maria stared at Robert like he had lost his mind. That's impossible, she said. David never mentioned having any family around here. Robert ran a hand through his hair, trying to organize his thoughts. My sister Lucy had a baby 15 years ago. She wasn't married, and back then, that was a bigger scandal than it is now. My parents made her give the baby up for adoption. They said it was for the best, that the baby would have a better life with a proper family. He paused, looking directly at Maria. The baby was a boy. They named him David before the adoption went through. We never knew what family took him, never knew what happened to him after that day. Maria felt like the world was spinning around her. You're saying my husband was your nephew? I'm saying it's possible. The age is right, the name matches, and now looking at this baby ... Robert gestured toward Tommy. He looks exactly like Lucy did when she was little. Same eyes, same nose, same everything. Mrs. Peterson found her voice. But Robert, even if that's true, what does it mean for this situation? Robert looked at her like the answer was obvious. It means this baby isn't going anywhere. He's family. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning. Maria stared at Robert, her mind racing to make sense of what he had just said. Family? This stranger claiming that her baby was his family? You're out of your mind, she whispered, backing toward the door. You don't even know us. You can't just walk in here and claim my baby is related to you. But Robert wasn't backing down. His eyes were fixed on Tommy with an intensity that made Maria's skin crawl. "Let me hold him," he said again, stepping closer. "Just for a minute. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize and walk right out that door. But if I'm right, ... If you're right, what?" Maria demanded. "What exactly are you trying to say?" Mrs. Peterson had gone pale as fresh flour. She could see where this was heading, and it wasn't the neat, clean solution she and her husband had planned. "Robert, maybe we should all sit down and talk about this calmly." But Robert was beyond calm now. 15 years of wondering about his sister's lost baby. 15 years of Lucy crying every Christmas and birthday, mourning the child she was forced to give away. And now, possibly, that child's own son was right here in front of him. "Maria," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I know this sounds crazy. I know you don't have any reason to trust me. But please, just let me look at him properly. I promise I won't hurt him." There was something in his voice, a kind of raw honesty, that made Maria hesitate. She looked at Mrs. Peterson, who nodded encouragingly. Against her better judgment, Maria slowly unwrapped the blanket from around Tommy's face so Robert could see him clearly. The moment Tommy's features were fully visible, Robert's breath caught in his throat. It was like looking at a photograph from 15 years ago. The baby had the same distinctive eye shape as Lucy, the same little cleft in his chin that ran in their family. Even the way his tiny ears were set on his head was exactly like his sister's. "Oh my God," Robert breathed. "It's true." "It's really true." Maria watched his face carefully. She had seen a lot of lies in her short life, especially from her husband. But the emotion on Robert's face wasn't something that could be faked. There were tears in his eyes, and his hands were shaking as he reached out again, stopping just short of touching Tommy's cheek. "Tell me more about David," Robert said urgently. "Did he ever mention being adopted? Did he talk about his childhood?" "At all." Maria's mind went back to the early days of their marriage, when they used to talk late into the night about everything and nothing. He ... He said his parents died when he was young? That he grew up with his aunt and uncle in the next county over. Her voice grew quieter. "But he never wanted to talk about it much, said it was too painful." Robert nodded grimly. "That's what they would have told him. The adoption agency, I mean. They probably said his real parents were dead, that it was better for him not to know the truth." His voice was bitter now. "My parents thought they were doing the right thing, but they destroyed 2 lives that day, Lucy's and David's." Mrs. Peterson had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement. "But Robert, how can you be so sure?" "Lots of people have. Similar features? It could just be a coincidence." Robert looked at her seriously. "Mrs. Peterson, do you remember about 5 years ago when that traveling portrait artist came through town? He painted pictures of families for money?" She nodded. "Yes, Mr. Collins, I think his name was. He set up in the town square for a week. Lucy was visiting that week. She had him paint a portrait of her, said she wanted something to remember. What she looked like when she was happy." Robert's voice caught. "I have that painting hanging in my cabin. If you saw it next to this baby, you'd understand. They could be twins." Maria felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Where is she now? Your sister?" "Portland. She moved there after everything happened. She's married now, has 2 other children, but she never stopped wondering about her first baby, never stopped hoping she might see him again someday." The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the bakery windows. Maria realized that other people were starting to gather outside, probably wanting to buy their morning bread. But Mrs. Peterson had locked the door, and she didn't seem inclined to unlock it any time soon. "Even if what you're saying is true," Maria said slowly, "it doesn't change anything. I still can't take care of him. I still don't have any money or anywhere to live." Robert's expression changed completely. "What do you mean it doesn't change anything? It changes everything. You're not alone anymore. You have family now." "I have a stranger who claims to be family," Maria corrected. "That's not the same thing." "But..." Robert was already shaking his head. "No, you don't understand. I work at the lumber mill. I make good money, steady money. I've got a cabin about 2 miles outside of town, 3 bedrooms, plenty of space. He looked directly into her eyes. You and Tommy can come live with me. Both of you. I'll take care of you until you get back on your feet. Maria stared at him in shock. You can't be serious. You don't even know me. Why would you do that? Because you're family now, Robert said simply. And family takes care of family. That's how it works. Mrs. Peterson was looking back and forth between them like she was watching a tennis match. But what about our arrangement? She asked quietly. Henry and I, we were so excited about raising the baby ourselves. Robert turned to her with surprising gentleness. Mrs. Peterson, I know you and your husband would give Tommy a wonderful life. But he belongs with his blood family now. Surely you can understand that. The older woman's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly. Of course I understand. It's just that we were so close to having what we've always wanted. Maria felt torn in a dozen different directions. Part of her wanted to believe Robert, wanted to trust that this stranger would actually help her. But another part of her was terrified. What if he was lying? What if this was some kind of trap? What if he was just as likely to abandon her as David had been? How do I know you're telling the truth? She asked. How do I know you won't change your mind in a week or a month and throw us out? Robert considered this seriously. I guess you don't know. You'll have to trust me just like I'm trusting that you're really David's wife and this is really his son. He paused. But I can tell you this, I've been alone in that cabin for 8 years now. I've been sending money to Lucy every month to help with her kids, wishing I could do more for family. If you and Tommy come live with me, you won't just be helping yourselves. You'll be helping me too. Tommy chose that moment to wake up and start fussing. Maria automatically began rocking him, making soft shushing sounds. Robert watched this interaction with fascination, like he was seeing a miracle unfold before his eyes. Can I ask you something? Robert said softly. Does he ever smile? Like really smile? Maria looked down at Tommy, whose fussing had calmed to soft baby sounds. Sometimes, when he's not hungry or tired, he has this little crook smile that makes his whole face light up. Robert's eyes filled with fresh tears. Lucy had the same smile. Crooked on one side like she was sharing a secret with you. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I'm sorry. I know this is all happening very fast, but I can't let you give him away to strangers when he has family right here. Maria looked at Mrs. Peterson, who was dabbing at her own eyes with her apron. The older woman gave her a watery smile. Honey, I think maybe this is how things were meant to work out. Maybe God sent Robert in here at just the right moment. Outside, more people were gathering, clearly wondering why the bakery wasn't open yet. Maria knew they couldn't stay in here much longer. She had to make a decision, and she had to make it now. She looked at Robert, this big, rough lumberjack, who claimed to be her baby's great-uncle. He seemed sincere, but then again, so had David at first. Could she really trust him with their lives? If I say yes, she said carefully, what exactly are you offering? Robert looked directly into Maria's eyes, his voice steady and sincere. I'm offering you a home, a real home, not charity. You and Tommy can have the spare bedroom until you're ready to be on your own. I'll help you find work in town, maybe at the general store or the post office. And Tommy will grow up knowing he has family who cares about him. Maria felt her heart racing. It sounded too good to be true, which in her experience usually meant it was. And what do you get out of this? Nobody helps strangers without wanting something in return? You're not strangers, Robert said firmly. You're the widow of my nephew, and that baby is my great-nephew. That makes you family. He paused, his voice growing softer. And honestly, I've been lonely out there in that cabin. It would be nice to come home to Voices, to have someone to cook dinner with, to watch that little boy grow up. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward, her eyes still red from crying over her lost dream. Maria, I know this is all very sudden, but Robert Wheeler is a good man. He's been coming to this bakery for 8 years, and he's never been anything but honest and kind. If he says he'll take care of you, I believe he will. Tommy started to cry then, a hungry wail that cut through Maria's heart. She hadn't been able to feed him properly in days, and he was getting weaker. She looked down at his tiny face, scrunched up in distress, and knew she was running out of time to make this decision. "There's something else," Robert said, reaching into his coat pocket. "Something that might help you believe me." He pulled out a small, worn photograph and handed it to Maria. "This is Lucy when she was 18, right before she had to give up her baby." Maria took the photograph with trembling hands. The young woman in the picture had kind eyes and a gentle smile. But what made Maria gasp was how much the face resembled Tommy's. The same eye shape, the same nose, even the same expression Tommy made when he was content. "She looks like him," Maria whispered, staring at the photo. "She really looks like him." "That's not all," Robert continued. "Lucy has a birthmark on her shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. If Tommy is really David's son, he might have the same mark." Maria's breath caught. She slowly unwrapped Tommy's blanket and lifted his tiny shirt. There, on his left shoulder, was a small, crescent-shaped birthmark that she had always thought was just a cute little mark. Now it felt like proof of something much bigger. Mrs. Peterson leaned over to look and gasped. "Oh my goodness. That's exactly what Robert described." Maria stared at the birthmark, then at the photograph, then at Robert's hopeful face. The evidence was overwhelming, but more than that, she could feel something in her heart telling her this was right. This was the miracle she had been praying for without even realizing it. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll come with you." Robert's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it," Maria said, though her voice was still shaky. "But I have conditions. I want to pay you back for everything once I find work. And I want to write to your sister to tell her about Tommy myself." "Lucy would love that," Robert said, his eyes bright with tears. "She's going to cry for a week straight when she finds out she has a grandson." Mrs. Peterson was crying too. But they were different tears now. Happy tears mixed with sad ones. "I'm going to miss not having that baby around," she said. "But this is better. This is how families should be." She hurried to the back of the bakery and returned with a large basket packed with food. Fresh bread, jars of preserves, some cheese, and even a few cookies. "Take this with you. Consider it a housewarming gift." "Mrs. Peterson, I can't." "Yes, you can," the older woman said firmly. "And don't you dare try to pay me for it. This is what neighbors do for each other." Robert looked out the window at the people still waiting outside. "Mrs. Peterson, you should probably open up. People need their morning bread." She nodded and moved toward the door, then turned back. "Robert, you bring that baby to visit me every week, you hear? I want to watch him grow up, even if I can't raise him myself." "I promise," Robert said. "Every Saturday morning we'll come by for fresh cookies." As Mrs. Peterson unlocked the door and let in the waiting customers, Robert helped Maria gather Tommy's few belongings. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with bright, curious eyes, as if he sensed that something important was happening. "Are you scared?" Robert asked Maria as they prepared to leave. "Terrified," she admitted. "But for the first time in weeks, I'm not hopeless." They walked out into the gray October morning together, three people who had been strangers an hour ago and were now family. Robert's cabin was a 2-mile walk through the woods, but he had an old truck parked behind the bakery. "It's not much to look at," he said, helping Maria into the passenger seat, "but it runs good, and it'll get us home." Home. The word sounded strange to Maria, who hadn't felt like she had a real home since her mother died. But as they drove through the pine trees toward Robert's cabin, she started to believe it might be possible. The cabin was bigger than she had expected, with a wide front porch and smoke curling from the chimney. It looked warm and solid and safe. Robert had clearly been working on it for years, adding rooms and improvements. There was even a small garden patch where he grew vegetables. "The spare room is upstairs," Robert said as he helped her out of the truck. "It's got a good bed and plenty of space for a crib. I'll have to build one, but I'm pretty handy with wood." Inside, the cabin was clean and comfortable. There were books on shelves, warm quilts on the furniture, and the smell of pine logs burning in the fireplace. It felt like a home where people actually lived and laughed and made memories. Over the next few days, Robert proved to be as good as his word. He helped Maria get settled, built a beautiful wooden crib for Tommy, and even drove into town to buy baby clothes and formula. When Maria worried about the money he was spending, he just smiled and said, "Family is worth every penny." 2 weeks later, the letter arrived from Portland. Lucy had written 12 pages, front and back, telling Maria how grateful she was to finally know what happened to her first son. She sent photographs of herself and her other children and promised to visit as soon as she could arrange time away from work. "She wants to meet Tommy," Maria told Robert as she read the letter aloud. "She says she's been dreaming about him every night since she got my letter." Robert was teaching Tommy to grab his finger, something the baby was getting very good at. "She's going to spoil him rotten when she gets here. Lucy always was soft on children." As winter settled over Pine Ridge, Maria found work at the post office, sorting mail and helping customers. She was finally able to contribute to the household expenses. Though Robert never made her feel bad about the weeks when she couldn't pay anything at all, Tommy grew stronger and happier every day. He learned to smile, his crooked little smile, just like his grandmother Lucy. He would laugh when Robert made funny faces and reached for the colorful leaves Robert brought him from his walks in the woods. One evening in December, as snow fell softly outside and Tommy slept peacefully in his handmade crib, Maria sat by the fire with Robert, both of them reading books. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't walked into the bakery that morning?" Maria asked. Robert looked up from his book and smiled. "Every single day. But then I remember that some things are just meant to be. Maybe David leaving led you to exactly where you needed to be." Maria nodded, looking around at the warm cabin that had become their home. "I used to think I was cursed, like nothing good would ever happen to me again. But maybe I wasn't losing everything. Maybe I was just making room for something better." Outside? The wind howled through the pine trees, but inside the cabin, 3 people who had found each other in the most unlikely way slept peacefully, knowing they were exactly where they belonged.